Restart. Roger that.
Slowly wait for it.
30.
29.
28.
27.
26.
25. 24.
23. 22.
21.
20 seconds and counting.
19.
18.
17.
16. 15.
14.
13.
12.
11.
10 seconds.
6. 4. And a 3.
2.
1.
Hello and welcome to Trust No One, the X-Files podcast, where me and some of my fellow agents discuss episodes of the X-Files. Today, we'll be discussing the 14th episode of the X-Files, directed by Rob Bowman. It's called Gender Bender, and it first aired on the 21st of January in 1994. And just before we start the episode up, some of the content within this episode is really potentially quite triggering and potentially quite culturally important. So just to sort of set the scene, obviously it first aired in 1994, and the 1990s were really the kind of HIV/AIDS epidemic. So fear around casual sex was very much rife. Fear around, unknown killer diseases breaking out within sort of the casual sex scene were very serious. In 1990, 31,196 people died of HIV/AIDS. And the prejudice around prostitution, the LGBT community, was really quite serious. So some of the terms that we'll discuss today are obviously very dated, and there's a context behind that. So we'll discuss those as we go. There's also content around date rape, and some of those issues as well, and porn being very much portrayed as a gateway to sexual assault. So with all of that kind of in mind, we'll tread carefully and we'll explore those issues when and if we need to. But to begin with, the opening of this episode very much takes place in this kind of rave style club, which I remember fondly. And the first question is, what did the presentation of the club scene make you think and feel?
Well, it took me back as well. I'm a kid of the 80s, so in late 80s, early 90s is when I was out every night ish. So it certainly took me back to that feel. I was really horrified at first with the episode. I thought, oh no, this is going to be like so many episodes, like so much television and movies back in the late 80s, early 90s. It's going to be the transgendered person that's the psychotic person. And because there was a lot of that, or the gay person that's only the bad guy, and I got past that though pretty quickly because it moved into a different area. But I was really concerned at first by that. But I did think it was fascinating. It did take me right back to that era. That's it for me.
Thanks, John. I mean, I think the music was very evocative. I thought the scene was shot quite effectively, to be honest. It felt authentic. It felt like the kind of clubs that I used to go and hang out in, certainly. And it had that sort of the cage dancing and just the sort of edgy, slightly glossy. I mean, that floor is going to be sticky, right? You can tell the opening with that shot.
I can smell that scene. That's the smell. Yeah.
It made me quite nostalgic for it, some of it, in some of the ways. So
yeah.
There was some interesting decor as well, wasn't there? What was with that huge kind of painted face then on the wall of the club?
Yeah, very evocative of H.R. Geiger. And we talked a little bit about before we went on the air that the writers actually used his work as kind of a jumping off point when they were creating the episode. And so that figures very prominently, his work as what's the word I'm looking for? It's specific, blah, blah, blah. Gender, not specific. God, sorry. That's not, what I'm trying to say. But
androgynous.
Yes, that's the word. There it is. That's the word.
Welcome.
Otherworldly, androgynous, sexual, very sexual, mechanical as well. So it had all of those elements, and I think those all bring you into the episode. This is what we're going to be exploring in this episode.
I think that's really interesting that you say that, because I really don't see it as sexual, like, at all.
Okay.
But I saw it and I thought it looked like Medusa, maybe.
I can see that too. There is a Medusa element to it.
There's a fluid quality to that artwork, right, in general, that style. And it's meant to be very evocative of kind of a strong, kind of emotive reaction, because it's sensual and it's mechanical and it's both organic and not at the same time. There's a duality to it. And it's, as a central image in the first opening scene, right, it establishes that kind of duality of the topic that they're going to be exploring, and you know, it's going to trigger people because it's not one or the other but both, and because it's so sensual and sinuous, right, there's always it's a slippery slope to go between one and the other very quickly. If you're an artist, you follow those lines, and it just evokes something about the episode that I think
it's
meaningful.
Beautiful and disturbing.
Yeah, right.
At the same
Duality
time,
of it, right?
Which is part of the theme as well.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, I went and saw Rocky Horror at the theatre earlier this week, and this episode in a way strikes me as like some of the same themes, but obviously a lot darker and a lot more distorted and disturbing, right? But there was that absolute fear around the LGBT community and what kind of weird, things were at play there to the slightly outraged cis straight community. So I think that idea of, well, what is this, and trying to understand this is absolutely represented in that artwork.
I think also with the HIV stuff going on during that time that you talked about in the intro.
Right, and people get hung up, and even today we still get hung up on the externals, right? How something is perceived, how it looks, how it seems. But at its essence, this episode really is about someone who's making wrong choices, right? Obviously, the character we're talking about here is making wrong choices, and those choices are resulting in deaths. But at its heart, it's what is it? Romspringen? What is that term that is used for children who from Hutterite or Mennonite communities who leave for a year? They go on their journeys across and they explore the world outside of their closed community, and they can choose to come back or they can choose to stay, right? And it's like there's that kind of that exploration and discovery of what's outside, right? And it's this duality of there's a beauty in, just like that bar scene, just like the dance, there's a beauty in that, beautiful colored lights and flashing, and it's rhythmic, and there's something very, natural and organic about seductive, right? But at the same time, the floor is sticky and it's not really hygienic, and people are getting really messy in there, right? So there's a duality to that experience as well.
I think so. And I think the additional complexity with this really is, although it's kind of a pheromonal thing that allegedly this being is using, effectively it's a date rape drug. And they know the consequences of doing that because they've done it. If they'd done it once and stopped, you know what I mean? That's a very different matter. That's a horrible situation. But this is somebody that repeatedly does this for their own pleasure and their own deviant pleasure. And I think that's why this presentation of it being so much within that scene is really problematic, in lots of different ways, which kind of leaves us onto the question of, the Kindred Group and the way that they're kind of profiled and presented. I mean, they're characterized as being religious, right? Living without electric, keeping themselves, all that kind of thing. It's very much your world and our world within the dialogue,
and perceived as primitive.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's an allure and a fascination with that, isn't there? That's presented, but at the same time, a kind of, well, what is going on there? There must be something dark and disturbing because nobody could just live like that today. So do we think then that using a religious group such as this as a subject in an episode would be received well today, or would that be seen as completely outrageous? Agent Michaels, what do you think about the way they're presented as a religious group?
I think that today, just with all the political correctness that's kind of expected with things, that they would probably have to make some changes with the way that the group was presented. I'm from southwestern Pennsylvania, and we actually have the Amish community not far from where we live, up to our north as well as to the east. And it's interesting how some of these groups are so different from what we would, I guess, consider mainstream or normal for the rest of us. But you still see them as part of a community. You know, they are their own community, but they are still part of the rest of us. And you know, you'll see them at Walmart. It's really interesting how it's, you know, two-sided there. And I think as long as today it was presented in a manner that's respectful, I don't think most people would take issue with it. I think you're always going to have a small group of people that are just going to say, you know, that's not something you can touch. You know, it's a religious group. We don't want to do this. We don't want to say that. But maybe looking at it like, oh, this is a bad group of people, that's definitely not going to be absorbed well from your audience. But I feel like when they put the episode together, that they didn't necessarily make it the whole community is bad. There were some weird things going on, especially with the rituals were happening in the barn later on. But it was more of, you had one individual that was doing something that was really questionable. And I mean, honestly, as I watched the episode, I was thinking to myself, well, if these people are kind of self-contained and they're taking care of themselves and doing what they need to do, who are we as an outsider to really say that, hey, if this is their burial procedure, that this is wrong, just because it's not what we would consider normal or what we would do. So I think if it's presented with some respect to the culture, the organization, however you want to characterize what that group is, I think we'd be okay.
Do we think then that, what's the significance of some of the rituals that they carry out? Because I think it's really interesting the way that, like you say, their burial and rebirths are presented there.
I think, isn't it? I would think those are meant to show tradition and magic, like, but not magic in the sense that, you know, it's casting spells, but rather magical in the sense that there's something supernatural, something beyond a natural process that they're honoring or adhering to, and there's power in that, right? There's power in the way they speak, there's power in the way they conduct themselves. Either it's just in terms of belief, right, where they can continue to maintain their community, or there's actually something there that gives them a strength that allows them to, you know, do amazing things. That's why
I think it's fascinating. You know, Scully is horrified that they make no effort to save him from something as simple as choking. But to them, you know, again, this is not a death. It's time for him to transform into his next being. So they're not going to interrupt that process, no matter how simple the solution may have been to stop him from dying. He's not dying, you know.
To them, that was nature taking its course.
That's exactly right. It's time for him to transform into his next being, which I thought was really interesting.
I think there's lovely parallels there, aren't there, in terms of medical interventionism with certainly in the UK, and I'm presuming elsewhere, where, you know, if a child is born into a religious family who do not believe in blood transfusions, for example, there's a huge moral debate in this country about whether the rights of the child supersede the religious beliefs of the parents. But I guess, you know, I mean, this is put forward as, you know, they go down and transform literally instantly into another being. But for those religious families, they must presume, well, this is the next step in their journey, and they might not be a physical being anymore, but they're going on to the next. So I thought that was a really thought-provoking scene, actually, of her desperate to intervene because of her scientific and medical training. And it's like, actually, you've got to respect what's going on there as well.
Yeah, but not. I don't mean to throw out a contrary point of view, but if there's going to be an interaction between two cultural representatives, both cultural representatives have to acknowledge each other's cultural values and recognize that communication has to occur. So in this context, right, Scully is saying, this is wrong. We got to, take care of this. You want to intervene because she's imposing her cultural values. But at the same time, they didn't really communicate very well. They invited them into the table or into the meal to participate, but they didn't prepare the outsiders for the situation that was going to be presenting itself at the meal. So in this context, both parties failed to establish good rapport because they didn't appreciate each other's cultural perspectives.
I can agree with what you're saying there, but in this particular case, you have Mulder and Scully who went and sought out these people, and is it trespassing? They didn't want them there. I mean, is it really their responsibility to say, hey, this is how we do things here, you need to respect that?
Yeah,
like,
you're right.
That's their house. It's like no holds barred. It's like, what happens here is what happens here, and you've got to deal with it. I get what you're saying. Like, hey, it would have been nice for them to say, well, this is just what we do, so if he dies, he dies. But I don't know if it's necessarily their responsibility in this particular case when they've done so much to preserve being outside of mainstream society, to explain it to two outsiders that went in there without permission, and they really didn't want them there.
Well, and the whole idea is that they're not going to share they don't want anybody to know who they are. So obviously they're not going to share that information in this particular case.
Yeah.
I completely see, Brad, what you're talking about. But of course, in this case, they're not going to divulge any information because they don't want them there. They don't, whether they're there on a research mission, are they there are they supposed to only be observers? I don't know, but obviously the one guideline that they do have is that they don't share anything, with those outside of the group. So it's different. I totally get what you're saying. It's just in this particular situation, it's a little bit different. But yeah,
I think
they could have certainly said something, but
as a
what
host,
are they going to say? Watch, he's going to come back.
No. But I think the contention was that he was coughing and he was sick and he was obviously very ill. That was the flag. But as the host, if you are throwing a dinner party and you've got a sick dog, right? And I know you do, right? You've got a right, but let's imagine that your dog is like physically ill, right, in the corner. You don't just welcome all your dinner guests in and let them discover that on their own. You prepare.
Well, no, you're right. But what are they going to say?
He's sick. He'll be fine. We'll just put him up into his room, and that'll this is how we do things. We will care for him separately, and that would have eased the tension right there.
But
so
of
anyway,
course, it's a TV show, so they're not going to do that.
But because that's a slice of the era, right?
Right.
It was about misunderstandings between groups of people. So I think the point I'm trying to make is that the error was they didn't communicate, that they imposed their views, and as a result, the conflict occurred.
That's okay. I can get behind that. That's interesting. Yes, I totally agree with that.
When you were talking earlier about how they might be seen as like the Amish or something like that, then I thought they probably got away with it partly because like naming the group something else, like naming them Kindred, so it sets them apart, I think, a bit. And also there's another scene I don't think we've talked about yet that I thought was really quite interesting, where the killer, I think, is talking to like a dead body.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing. I mean, it works well in terms of exposition, doesn't it? But it did feel quite surreal. But I guess if you take it down the path of this is somebody who, it's Marty, isn't it? I think it's called Brother Martin, who's clearly very lonely and clearly very kind of lost in some ways and is seeking meaning, and is almost kind of seeking sex, I think, for pleasure, but also for connection, because clearly didn't feel connected or connected enough to even Brother Andrew, who's supposedly the best friend, right? So I think that almost, I mean, it like John, I was like, oh no, this is another LGBT kind of insane person who now talks to bodies. And I was like, no, because I think the way they get away with it just is they make him an alien, or her an alien, or them an alien, right?
Well, so, also, you got to remember his culture, that person isn't dead.
Yeah, exactly.
They're going to be transforming into something else. Yeah. So you still have that psychology going on too.
Yeah, it's that no one's really ever dead, right?
Right.
Which again is another layer. Is like, do they have full comprehension of the harm they're causing, or do they?
And I don't know that he did.
No,
but yeah.
But also, I think the way that they established that they were, it looks like they were aliens, was such an X-Files way to do it. In the it's like hinted at just to be on the verge of being established firmly, with so many clues. But it's you're still like, well, were they actually alien or not?
Yeah, there was. I know that a lot of people didn't like the kind of the denouement ending. Feels like they threw it in a totally different direction. I actually really enjoyed that. The idea that suddenly we see. So what is this? And I think that was one of the questions, wasn't it? Somebody asked, did they make that field like that to look like that, or was there really a ship, or were they aliens? I loved it.
And you mentioned connection, right? So I think that the setting up of the murders in the club is a commentary about kind of the modern kind of way that people interact. It's a very shallow, not very deep, very glossy, to borrow the phrase. It's very transitory. It's very, something about that scene, that type of activity there's a seeking of connection, and I think that's a commentary about how people are lost. People, young people in particular, get caught up in the I guess the shiny lights and the newness of it, and eventually they become a little bit jaded and they find other things to do, right? But
I think it's really interesting the way the victims are presented, and there's a bit of victim blaming and shaming on the go, because there's certainly, I mean, firstly, it's only the male victims, apart from Scully, who's potential victim, who are portrayed in any detail in terms of we see what's going on. They're all presented as cheaters. They're all on the phone to their partners, and then there's a breakdown, and then they get punished basically for being for cheating, which I think was really interesting. But they also all have the best sex of their lives before they go out with a bang, right?
Right.
So literally, and I think that's really interesting, because Scully's got a really pious, preachy line at the beginning. Oh, it's hard to imagine in this day and age.
I was just gonna say that. I was just gonna mention that exact line, because I thought that was really, that cuts a couple of ways. That line cuts a couple of ways. There's the physician in her saying, what are you doing having unprotected sex when you know that it's a death sentence? There's that side of it too, which but I thought about that too. I thought that was interesting that she said.
And then of course there's the irony that she of course gets drawn into it as well, and the fact is that none of them are choosing actually to cheat or choosing to have sex.
That's right.
They're being date raped because there's a drug involved. Right. So and I think, I mean, I can never remember his real name because he's just Krychek to me. But when Krychek gets to kind of, say what happened, Michael, that's it. When he gets to actually say, what happens, the first thing he does is rates her, right? So he says, she was a kind 3. And it's like, oh, wow.
Oh, okay. Right.
So, you know, there was a certain amount of, right, okay, so it's that. And then there was this really uncomfortable bit where he's like, oh, I can't really talk about what's happened, because obviously being attracted to a man or having sex with a man was presented as being so quote unquote shameful. So I think he's a really creepy character, actually.
I thought he was a douchebag.
Yeah, absolutely. He is. He's vile. But I think he's
they
typical of
represented
that masculinity fear, you know, of like, what if I was attracted to someone who happened to be a guy, you know, even if initially I just rated them as a kind 3, but they put a spell on me and they tricked me with their evil penis ways, you know. I mean, it's just absolutely hilarious, I think, in terms of the fear of that age.
And yes, that's it. The fear of that age, right? And we've come a long way since then in many respects, but we've also taken a few steps backwards. And I think it has to do with just the groups and the way that we communicate with each other across the divides.
So that sort of takes us on quite nicely, really, to this idea of gender and how gender is presented. I mean, I think Scully's got a line in there about what if it's a transvestite, which obviously is the wrong terminology, because that would simply be somebody cross-dressing. But I think what she means is, what if it's, you know, somebody who presents in different ways? So does that male-female transformation work today, you know, with all the really important issues around trans rights and how trans people are presented? What do we think about that now?
Well, first, sorry, I just want to make mention of Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah.
Right. That whole
right,
culturally significant terminology that just suddenly pops up now. Right. Of course, you have Rocky Horror, which presented still as a fringe thing. And then you have Silence of the Lambs, which brings it more into the mainstream vernacular. Right. So that's why I suspect a lot of these issues that came from current pop culture make it into the episode. But I thought the choice to have the characters flip between men and women and then men and women, like they were going from one gender to the next, not arbitrarily, but rather just in terms of transition, right? It was male to female, female to male, going like that. I think that was well chosen, because it implies that those characters, those people, are both two-spirit, right? They're all two-spirit, if you will. So it's just which manifests itself at that next moment.
Yeah, like I said, I was really worried about that when the episode started, but I thought it was handled really in an interesting way, and I didn't find it offensive. I didn't feel that they were judging somebody in that regard. Agent Michaels, what did you think?
I feel like, you know, the mid-90s, a lot of the gay community still was not as accepted as it is today. You know, today I mean, it's Pride Month, you know, it's so normal, and we're so much more accepting of it today. And I think many of the communities that are out today are accepted because it's like, hey, we understand more. I think back in the 90s, there was still just a lot of misunderstanding of what something meant or what people were doing. And I feel like in this particular case, the writers did a decent job in making it so that it wasn't, you know, some disgusting stereotype.
Right. I do too.
think it was something that you would definitely have to tread lightly on. We've talked about things not aging well within the series. I don't think this was something that aged terribly. I think in most situations you can probably go back and look at it and be like, yeah, you know, we could have handled this with a little more grace or poignance or whatever. But again, where we are today as a society, at least in the United States, I think most people are willing to learn more about the gay community and understand it. And, you know, where we were 20 years ago with all of this, it's a very different thing. And
I mean, trans situations weren't something that even, you know, the gay community accepted.
Right.
And I can say that since I'm a member of the community. And I know that back then that was just frowned upon. anybody that would have been considered trans would have just been like drag queens,
Right.
and it would have been, it would not have been, it would not even have been talked about that this is somebody that legitimately feels like a woman trapped in a man's body.
Right.
But I think for the episode's sake, it goes to what Brad's saying about a lot of it is about communication and miscommunication. And so in that regard, this really still works, I think. We don't really understand what this entity is. And so, with that lack of information, lack of knowledge, I think there's actually, a couple of lessons in the episode that, are still, germane today.
Yeah, I think they didn't really go with any sort of stereotype that would have been,
Yeah.
Contemporary at the time. And I think that's one of the reasons why this has aged well.
Yeah.
Well, the stereotype that they did have was Michael, right?
Yes,
he
absolutely.
was a stereotypical character, and
Oh, yeah.
any of the people that they encountered in the generic clubbing scenes, right? They were stereotypes of the people that were supposed to be part of that experience. But for me, one of the things that the character, like I said before, this character is seeking something, seeking connection. All the people who go through that initial phase of life is seeking something, seeking connection. Doesn't matter what orientation or what background you come from. That connection is what is common to all of our experiences. And I think what we've done a good job today in our modern media is that we're presenting those relationships, right? Let's just say relationships, whether they're hetero or other, right? I don't know what term would be appropriate in this context, but it's that two people are committed to each other and they love each other. And that's what I think we forget, because that's at the heart of everything. Society still gets hung up on the visuals. They still get hung up on what's taboo, what appears strange and unusual and makes you uncomfortable. But I think we're moving past that more. And if we can just celebrate those things, like the kindred, they just wanted to be left alone, right? They just wanted to be left alone because they knew, as we saw, brother, what was the guy's name with Scully? Brother
Andrew,
right? He succumbed to temptation because he had power. He had something that gave him an edge, a predatorial edge. And he himself, even though he didn't have to, you could see him originally as being maybe he's a nice guy, right? But no, that power, right? And this is what we've encountered in our last 15 years. It's become more prevalent that we are talking more about this in context of power and authority and relationships and professional relationships in particular. But the whole show has so many things that are components of it that were almost too early, if we just transplanted it, there are some things that just planted seeds, say maybe for what we're dealing with today.
I think that leads us quite nicely onto this idea of actually the way that Scully was attacked by the male kindred, by Brother Andrew. What do we think about that and what's going on there? You've touched on power briefly there, Brad, and I think that's spot on. What do you think about the way that he manipulates her? Or is it fully intentional? What's going on?
Yeah, I think it was just, I think they were best friends for a reason. It's just that Andrew was a little quieter and a little shyer and a little bit little more reluctant to take the chance, right? And with the door closed and the chair in front, this is his opportunity.
That's interesting. It's a completely different take than I took from it.
What did you think, Agent Dan?
Well, I noticed, basically in the last scene they have together, and it seems like he's going to maybe try to do the same thing again. And I thought, what is his intention at that point? It's to make sure, no one gets hurt. So maybe, that was part of his intention.
What do you
You
mean
think
by
he was
giving
just
her
trying to
information?
show her
Or
what could
no,
happen?
no
Or
one get no in that scene. In that case, no one got shot. Obviously, I guess with sexual
Yeah,
assault, and so
yeah.
we
But
it
I
just
took
can't see that.
he had sway over her. He could have taken the gun from her, but in that moment, in that scene, he knocked the gun away first, but then he backhanded her. He hit her full on, right? So there was something a little bit darker in the character than just the simple the way he was presented at first.
I guess I meant that he doesn't want anyone to be killed.
True. Okay, I see what you're saying.
it's almost like part of him wants to do the things that his friend is doing.
Yeah.
But he was either too afraid to do that, or he was fighting with his own conscience, perhaps. But when the opportunity did present itself, he did go for it. I think it would have been interesting if he had done that to Mulder instead, just as a.
Me
Just as
too.
it would never have happened back then, but
Yeah,
it might
I was
happen.
thinking-
It could happen, if the episode was now,
Yeah.
they could have done something like that, and I think
Yeah.
that would have been fascinating.
Yeah.
I don't think it would have made the airwaves if it had been Mulder
Yeah.
who was being accosted.
No, not back then. It would not have.
The censors
But I think it
have
would have been.
sentences.
It would have really been interesting.
But even back then, I found that whole sequence to be icky. I just
Yeah,
did
it was
not
hard to watch.
enjoy.
That was hard to
that,
watch. That was not.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was difficult. But I guess that was the point, right?
I think that's it, isn't it? It's supposed to be. I mean, he's supposed to be monstrous by that point, and it's that idea of abuse of power being monstrous in whatever
Also,
form
the
it
friend
comes in.
next door that is a monster that you
Yeah.
don't realize is a monster because he seems
Yeah.
like such a nice, timid guy. I mean, I know that's a huge stereotype, but
I know what you mean.
you're not prepared for that reaction.
Did
But part of
anybody
me wondered if he knew what he was doing at first, but I guess he did, didn't he? I mean, obviously he knew what he was doing.
did anyone find it kind of odd that Scully was swayed in each subsequent moment? The first time it happened, she was taken aback. She knew something was odd, specifically with that guy, but she allowed herself to be in situations where that guy was manipulating her again.
Well, but she liked him. She liked him instantly. There was something about him that she liked.
I think
And
also
so she let her guard down with him.
Right.
I think also there's the facet of there's the extremely potent, powerful pheromones stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she was like, overcome by that,
Yeah.
But I think the reason she even allowed the situation to happen is because she thought of him as somebody that was really struggling with his place in the community. This was his best friend who's done these horrible things, so he wants to help. And there was something about him that she was touched by, whether that was actually probably a contact high from the beginning or not. Probably was. She wasn't aware of it. It was further away, so there wasn't quite that much intensity at the beginning, but she instantly liked and trusted him.
I just felt like that was really out of character. Like when she first met him on the road, it to me seemed like a very forced, awkward, like, hey, we're here to do an investigation, so let me try to connect with this person here, and I'm going to talk to you about horses. Did you name her?
I really thought it was because of the pheromones. I really did. I thought that's what disarmed her instantly. There was something about him that she was drawn to, and I really thought it was the whole pheromone thing.
I don't know what I think it was, but it just seemed really out of character for her to, extend her hand and,
But I think that's it.
About the horses, and it was just
I think that was it, though. I think he infected her.
I get that. It just seemed really out of character for her to do that, though. It didn't make a lot of sense to me.
And the concern. Go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to say, I think that scene in the club with Michael shows that like the physical tactile contact has to be made for the pheromones to take effect. Because
my concern about that whole sequence was that it took a very strong, capable female character, right, who was iconically powerful at a time when, I mean, that's what brought the season or the series so much acclaim, right? Was the portrayal of this strong, capable, competent person, and reduced her to a manipulatable puddle. And she couldn't fight against it. And that was the problem for me. She wasn't able to.
Point. But I think that was the point.
But it reduced
that there was no fighting it.
I think, but it reduced her. It reduced her in. So if I were just to look at her character now, she's lost a couple of steps for me in terms of. And I'm not. This is not victim blaming. I'm not trying.
No,
I
know. No,
just
definitely.
that, you know, maybe it's now after all this has happened that we say, you know, you go into situations aware and you're thinking ahead, but she's a trained FBI officer, right? That's what she was trained to do. And in this context, I agree with Andrea that it just seemed out of character.
But I think that was the whole point, to get us shocked that she could fall that easily. That's how powerful whatever they had was.
I think that scene, I'm sorry to interrupt you, and I'm like laughing to myself here. That awkward, weird smile that she had on her face when she's like,
I know.
Oh.
I think she got given some really painful bits of dialogue as well, to be honest, in this episode. Like, I don't think it was flawless in terms of writing. And I think because, I mean, at various points, the cue on the script must have been, you know, look like you're falling in love with him. Look like
God.
It's really awkward.
It's really awkward, not a character.
Yeah.
And maybe she was struggling with having to even play that, you know.
I think so. Given her
she probably didn't feel it either, you know.
Yeah.
He was like, I wouldn't fall for it this easily, you know. As an actor, she may have certainly been thinking that.
In the context of duality, right? I don't think they presented her equally in the dual aspects of her personality. The person who could succumb to this, but also the person who could pull herself out of it, right? And,
I agree. Yeah,
and even and honestly,
I don't know why I'm reluctant to agree with that, but I am.
You know,
but
I'm
I
sorry,
do agree with that.
But Mulder,
no, I do agree with that.
Mulder should have picked that guy up and thrown him through a wall when he walked in and saw him like that.
What was that all about? It was like, I mean, really just there was no.
That was the bit that was victim blaming for me. He was like, what were you doing? You idiot. Oh my God.
Yeah,
and
that was weird. That was weird
growing up. I'm like,
that was weird because it was like he just kind of just was like,
get off of her.
You old whore,
get off of her, you bad guy. Get off of her.
Oh my God.
I wouldn't even have said anything. I would have just picked him up by the scruff of his neck and he would have gone through the wall.
Yeah, it was weird.
That's not going to happen.
And again, maybe that's the male writing, you know, at the time, but because that was just so bizarre. It's like, you're just a whore. What do you think? What do you think you're doing? Right. You know, and it was just that was not well done.
No, that didn't age well.
No.
I think because that went back to that line about her saying, "Oh, who'd have sex with a stranger?" And then obviously she nearly does. It's like, oh, look at her. She was all preachy earlier, and now, you know. But Mulder does that. Mulder's the voice of that, and that's why.
Yeah, he is.
And maybe that's, and I know I mentioned this late in a question, but maybe that's the allegory of this piece, right? Maybe that this piece is about paying attention and being aware and not falling for these kinds of things in the world. You know,
if it is, I think that would be extremely preachy. But I think Mulder
90s TV was kind of preachy at times.
It was
at times, yeah. I think that Mulder realizes that Scully's under the effects of the pheromones that she's been affected.
I hope that he does, but he doesn't behave like that. And then maybe it's just that he's so angry about what's happened that he's just like, he's not really holding it together very well, or I don't know. But the way he treats her is not like someone that's nearly been sexually assaulted.
Yeah.
It's very much, come on, let's get out of here. What were you doing, you idiot? And then just watches her throw out. I mean, there's just no compassion there. There's no support. It's a lesson in
I
what not to
wasn't
do.
aware of that, but I was aware of that sort of thing when they had the conversation later in the car.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I mean, we've talked briefly there about this idea of allegory, or is it an allegory then about the dangers and distractions of modernity or urban life, or is it a message more about loss of faith, temptation? What do we think of the kind of big themes and ideas in this piece then?
Well, I think definitely temptation, power imbalances, and the temptation, because Brother Andrew had, succumbed to the temptations. And, I think Brother, what was Martin?
Marty, yeah.
He succumbed earlier.
He's about to slide right down the rabbit hole as well.
So I definitely think there's the temptation there, and a little bit of the disproportional kind of abilities, right? So if you have some kind of power, you have something that gives you an edge. Do you use it for good, or do you use it for ill?
Or do you think it's the old situation of that much power just breeds
abuse?
Yeah, I mean, it's
which might be why they pulled themselves out.
Well, I think that's exactly right.
Away.
I think that is why one of the reasons why they were so separated is because they knew the dangers of what happens when it's so easy to manipulate these humans.
Right.
I could do anything I want. And so,
but
what's gods. The whole point of it? What is the whole point of them being there? I mean, is it observing? I mean, I guess that's something that we don't know, because it's never really touched upon at all. We don't really know even if they were really aliens, but if we go by the premise that they're there to observe only, and this is one of the reasons why, because humans are fragile creatures and we can overcome them too easily.
Regarding that, I just had a look at the Wikipedia page about Genderbender, and it reminded me that it is technically classed as a Monster of the Week episodes, and having been briefly mentioned during this discussion that they are supposed to be monstrous to a certain degree.
That scene. There's a scene from a Star Trek movie, First Contact, where they're abandoning ship, and they say, where are we going to be distributing the people, right? And they have them all over the place: Australia, this place, very remote areas. And the last thing they said was, stay out of history's way. Yeah. So it could be a case that this is similar, right?
Yeah.
It could be nefarious intentions, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's just they had to wait their 150, 200 years to get rescued.
Or the
that could be.
The concept of the Temporal Prime Directive is similar as well.
Yeah, you're not supposed to interfere.
Yeah,
right. With the monkeys that you're observing. You're not supposed to jump in and start living with them. You're supposed to only observe.
But I did like the two-spirit motif of the Monster of the Week, right? I mean, the kindred themselves aren't the monsters; it's the person, right? It's Martin and Andrew who take the power, the extra edge they have, and they use it for ill. It turns them into the monsters, and then but as we backtrack that, it's the otherness of the kindred, right? It's the way they're different. It's the way that would throughout history has been used to persecute, right, those who have different views, different ideas, different beliefs, different looks, right, different different fashion sense, all kinds of craziness. But it was the way that kind of extra quality was used by those not deviants, that would be the wrong term, but the criminals, right? I think that's what makes it so stark and so painful for us to see, because how we look at that one group or the two of them then gets painted back to the bigger group of the Kindred.
I kept thinking about Witness, the Harrison Ford movie. Because I think it's about the same time that movie was probably out, wasn't it? I can't remember exactly, but maybe it's a couple of years after Witness. But we've always been fascinated by the other, the unusual, the group that we don't completely understand. We are fascinated and drawn to that and repulsed by that at the same time, I think. So the episode plays into all of those feelings that a lot of us already have towards the other, and I think I think that's one of the things I really liked about the episode. I thought it was clever that the others really are others, and I liked that.
Yeah, I think there's that bit as well, isn't there, about when they are talking to the dead body and they say, "Oh, touching a human man or woman was as powerful for me as it was for you." It's a kind of like, you're not going to ever understand me and where I'm coming from, but I am you. I've just got this additional thing almost, and it's not being used to justify, but it's in a way being used to humanize, I think, and to say, look, we're being driven by the same sexual urges here. You want to have sex with, I mean, it's not because obviously the drugging issue, but on the sort of level of it, you can say they're both there because they want to have a good time. And if it was consensual and if there wasn't the pheromone issue, you could say that was a completely valid act. And there's that idea, isn't there, of like, don't think that anybody in the world is actually that different from you. We've all got the same base desires and base instincts. We just express them in very different ways. And it is a sort of weird lesson about tolerance, I think, and understanding and seeking understanding.
Oh, I think so. Yeah.
And consent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question. I was wondering, because it crossed my mind that perhaps like the makers of this episode might be like portraying in a certain way, like club culture is somewhat monstrous, and maybe I didn't know. Like, do you think they were trying to appeal to club culture, or do you think they were trying to sort of dissuade viewers from that, so they weren't going out on like Friday nights or whatever, so they'd be staying at home to watch the X-Files?
That's actually an interesting question.
Get them into their sofas. I like it. Don't leave the house.
I don't know how to answer that. I do like that question, though.
Well, in the era of date rape drugs, right? In the era of disease that was, because of sexual contact, in the era of uncertainty about pregnancy, right? And, new wave or modern feminists, the idea that they didn't have to take care so much, the men had to be responsible for, there's all kinds of things that were at play. And, I would say that they were not trying to paint clubbing scenes, nightclub sequences, right? I don't think they were trying to paint that in a very good light. I don't think it was like, okay, don't go to the club, stay Friday nights and watch X-Files. But
I do really like
definitely
that
saying there was something wrong with that.
I really love that idea.
So I guess thinking about how the episode ends then, do we think that was a bit rushed? Did it feel like, I think you might have said it earlier, Agent John, but sort of Deus Ex Machina type, flip, let's just resolve this quickly? Or did it feel like, yeah, that's resolution and we'd accept that resolution?
very Twilight Zone-ish again. And I happen to like the Twilight Zone quite a bit, so it didn't bother me. It gave me a feeling of resolution to a point, so that I was satisfied. I remember smiling to myself at the end of the episode, thinking, okay, so it worked for me in that regard.
Cool. Agent Michaels, what did you think of the ending? What were your sort of reactions?
I had thought back to an earlier scene where I think Mulder and Scully had come onto the property, and you saw people working in that field with like the same plants. So I guess at the end, as they're panning out and showing what's presumably a crop circle, my thought went to, okay, is this an alien situation and that's what came down and created this shape? Or is this just a very highly intelligent group of people that are just kind of, hey, we are earthbound and we got to make it look like something else. So here's our crop circle. Let's go. And like, as silly as that may sound.
I think that's part of it too. I think there is that element.
I don't necessarily believe they were alien. The other side of that is what were they? What purpose did their actions serve? I kind of feel like I was left with more questions than answers. But yeah, that end scene, I don't think it was a bad choice. I didn't necessarily feel like it was complete closure.
For me, the startling moment, I bought the last part. That's fine. Crop circle, aliens, that's good. The part that made me shake my head was the disappearing into the shadow.
In the alleyway.
They just disappeared. They just
like melted
transported.
Away. Yeah.
Right, I forgot about that. That's right.
Yeah,
that didn't work for me either.
So once that happened, once there was this kind of surreal or very, very space agey, if you're a Star Trek fan, then it would have been okay, fine, they beamed away.
They got beamed away.
But in that moment, it was something
really
beyond.
worked for me.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that, actually.
They're aliens. Okay, cool. They're aliens.
Yeah, I didn't like that.
It was a necessary scene, wasn't it? Because actually he could have just disappeared. That would have been perfectly plausible. Somehow he escaped. And then you would go and see the crop circle. It was a really odd choice. I'm not sure about that.
So it's crossed my mind that David Coveney had, by this time, been in Twin Peaks, playing a transgender character in Twin Peaks.
I'm sorry, what? Sorry, say it again.
It crossed my mind that David Duchovny had been in Twin Peaks playing a transgender character.
That's
really
right.
Before
Yeah.
Wasn't it Dennis/Denise?
Yes, I think that's exactly right. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to look that one up.
Yeah, he does not a pretty woman, by the way.
In his younger years. So that would have been at the time, Twin Peaks would have been really cutting edge, kind of out there kind of television, and this would have been a pretty powerful character choice for him in his career.
It
right,
was,
to play that kind of character.
Of course, it was still the psycho character-ish.
Yeah.
Okay.
But still, it was. Well, Agent Bennett, what did you think about the ending?
I mean, it did feel a bit like it was just wrapping it all up. But what else were they going to discover about them? Do you know what I mean?
I don't know. Yeah.
It was kind of like, you're going to capture him and then what? I mean, and then interview him and lock him in a padded cell like some of the other monsters of the week. I mean, maybe they could all hang out down there, couldn't they? But,
They're going to have an Arkham Asylum at some point, aren't they? With all the different... I think
it works fine. I was fine with them being shipped off, and it was there's an interesting line there, we take care of our own. I did think that they would deal out justice to the members of the community that had misbehaved. So I felt like justice would be done, particularly by the sort of female leader of the group. Well, in that phase of their life, female.
Right.
He really seemed to be laying it down, even with the guy that spoke out around the dinner table, right? So it was like, oh no,
Yeah.
there was law and order there, actually.
Yeah.
And I felt the were going to be sort of justice was going to be served, just maybe on a different planet. But that's okay, because that's easier than get it through a court of law in the US and the UK, right? So I'm all for that. So yeah, I'm fine with the ending, actually, I
But
think.
didn't you think that Brother Martin, right? He said they're going to punish me. I know they're going to punish me, so they're not going to leave me behind.
Yeah,
but he said it in a way that implied that it wasn't going to be a severe punishment. It wasn't going to be a terrible thing. It was just going to be a matter of fact. Like I did something bad. Then they'll deal with it, but they're not going to leave me behind. I'm going to go with them.
Do you think he just thought it was worth it for the pleasure and for the power and whatever else?
Which then would imply that he has a very skewed sense of power. Right?
Yeah.
I think it
reinforces the ideas of the episode.
It speaks to the whole porn addiction type of thing too, in a way.
Yeah.
At that point, he's completely addicted to that kind of power, that kind of sexual high that he gets from it.
I thought that was seeded really, really in quite a sort of crass way early on, wasn't it? With we found these magazines and
that was his gateway, right? Was the Glamour magazine,
Yeah, and it's like, and then the other brother Andrew was like, oh no, they were too tawdry for me, or some glib little line. He's like, I want mine in a suit, who's an FBI agent, basically. And it's like, yeah, you just want this, you think you're better, but you're not.
But basically. Was it porn?
It was porn magazines. It was Razzle and stuff, wasn't it? I think.
So
it was a combination of
similar to the Jersey Devil, where Mulder's
it was a combination. It was like Glamour magazine, but then there were some porn magazines in there too.
Okay, because I just took it as being like the glossy magazines that are fashion magazines and that are depicting beautiful people in front of cars, and
there was both
shopping and
it was both.
I think it was like all consumerism just in magazines, wasn't it?
And
it's
like
she's for sale, then she's for sale, basically.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
So during this discussion, all the way through and even before, there's been two things that I've been meaning to say. Firstly, I wonder how Scully relates to the Kindred, a religious organization, when she has a faith herself. And secondly, also, I guess probably my understanding or context or whatever that I view this episode is probably different from most people, because my headcanon is that none of it actually happens and it's a story related afterwards, and the Kindred don't actually exist.
So what is like a shared hallucination that they go through?
It's just I wouldn't say it's a hallucination. I just imagine that it may be a story that's
like a fable or a folk tale or something.
So the next scene after the crop circle is some guy sitting there typing up on a typewriter.
Or it's the
end.
Or it's the last scene. It's the last scene in Princess Bride where he's like, all right, so that's the story for the night.
Right.
Sweet dreams.
But that's a good question about Scully and faith, because
that actually is. And I think maybe that plays into a little bit about maybe her willingness to
stop, John. Just stop.
I know.
That's a stretch.
I know. I'm really trying.
You have a faith. I have a faith. Hi there. How are you? Here's my ball. Let's play.
There's a bit of a terrible thing there.
I'm really trying to force that baby to work.
You really are.
I don't know why.
I agree with John, though. I really do.
Oh, really? So you think that's what initially establishes that connection?
Yeah, seeing the having a faith in things other than what is face value, that there's more to life, maybe a connecting sort of tissue or whatever.
I don't know if it was necessarily the driving force, but that did cross my mind. It's like, okay, this group of people have their religious convictions, and Scully has her Catholicism that, she it alludes to it numerous times throughout the series, and did that tie in somehow? I think maybe very, very loosely. I don't think it was necessarily the driving force for like, hey, hi, what's your horse's name?
You guys hate that scene, but
But
maybe
no,
that
I
does
think
go a little bit towards why she's not quite as willing to condemn them right away.
right,
Maybe.
right.
Yeah, I
Because I
also
think when
think
most
she's
people
just
think
like
about
generally. I think she's just like generally interested in life and alternative viewpoints and stuff like that, as we see in like the episode All Things, for example, like much later in the
Yeah.
X-Files.
I think also when people think religion, most of the connotation that religion has to it, I mean, granted, we're, 25 years removed from that era, was generally a positive thing. It's changed an
that's
awful lot since then. But I
Yeah.
think, when you picture like a church-going individual or somebody associated with a religious community, generally, I think the idea is, these are good people.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah.
I was going to say, I think it's more likely that, because if you remember the visual sequences of them meeting the Kindred, right, after they left the feed store, which, by the way, Mulder's, right, you want to think of the feed store?
Yeah.
That whole thing was kind of maybe a little bit off, right?
Yeah.
But when they get out of the wagon, right, he gets out of the wagon, starts playing with the harnesses on the horse, and then a woman turns him around and buttons up his collar.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And Scully sees this. So I think it's more likely that she sees an adult male being treated like a child and makes an assumption about the mental state of this person, which is why she walks up and goes, "Hi, is that your horse? You're not
That
very
makes
smart,
sense.
are you?
That's
Let's
like
talk
a,
like you're a child."
Okay.
like a
All
sort of
right, I can see
Steinbeck
that.
Lenny scenario, do you mean?
I think it's more likely that she was trying to be kind to what she assumed would be someone who was
A
not
simple
all
person.
there.
Well, I thought, yeah,
it
I see
wasn't
that.
really all there.
I thought
but
maybe she felt bad for him because he's being emasculated by this old woman. So she's going to try to, again, that same idea that you're saying. I didn't see the maybe the mental side of it, but I did think that she was trying to reach out to somebody that she feels probably treated like crap in his community.
we've seen as a teacher, I know other people here, if you're ever with you watch how adults treat treat children in new situations, right? They will speak to them typically as children, but they won't speak to them as people, young people, nevertheless. But there's a certain quality, a certain tone, and I think that's what I got from that scene.
She did have that. Hi, that's your horse? Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
which could be why she was disarmed. She wasn't expecting anything.
Oh, that could be. Yeah.
So that's her prejudice as well.
And here I'm going to beat that my horse here for a second, John. Right, which is why I think the episode is really about be cautious in those situations, and any situation you got to be aware. Stranger danger, which is why Andrea's comment about this doesn't fit in her character seems to be reinforced because she does condescend a little bit in that beginning sequence, and it just seems out of place for some of the decisions that she made.
Okay, so to bring it to a conclusion, then, team.
That flogging that horse.
Let's leave our horses be. So
we're feeding a dead horse.
Here we are. So many dead horses. It's gonna be a huge grave.
Get up, Nelly. Get up, Nelly. Get up, Nelly. Come on. You've got another 10 miles in you. Let's go.
Come on, girl.
I'd like to apologise to all horses. Number half of the making of this programme, we absolutely promise, no matter what it may seem. Scores out of 10 then, team. X's out of 10. Dan, do you want to kick us off? How many X's out of 10?
I thought X's are crop fields, perhaps.
Cornfields imply zeros.
Maybe 6.
Cool. Any
That's
reason
average
why?
for me. It's just I find it a mediocre episode.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank
I'm
you.
actually going to agree with him. A 6, average. One thing that I liked as I watched the episode, I felt like some of the images with the weather and the lighting and the forests that they shot were beautiful.
Love the shot of the barn with
Yeah.
the rain. With the rain.
Yeah.
That was a nice shot.
There were some really beautiful shots.
Yeah.
And that's really the only reason I went with a 6 instead of a 5.
Talking about beautiful shots, I loved like the how they designed the cave and
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
that
down
was
there,
nice.
the
There were
production
some.
design.
That was very nice.
Yeah.
Agent John?
Yeah, I gave it a 6 as well, which is funny. You know, kind of average. You know, I think if we made this episode today, we could really make it something really interesting. But yeah, just average.
Cool. Agent Brad?
I found that some of the images, some of the cinematography was good, but for a group of people that they didn't have electricity on their farm, did they?
No.
The Kindred?
Not as far as I could see.
But in that last sequence where Mulder and Scully come back, that's a really well lit from multiple angles farm, right? They got shadows being cast in one direction, they got shadows being cast in another direction, and that's not all moonlight. So I just felt, and it was white light too, so there was just something off. Yeah, I'm going to give it a 6. I can't even say there were characters that I liked or actors who did secondary characters that were, really, really good.
I thought it was all pretty average.
Yeah, you know how I am with that. Secondary characters.
And even that, and I had
wasn't anybody for me.
I had real high hopes when I saw him, the character actor that was going to be in the episode.
Yeah,
I really had high hopes for that, and then it just didn't really pan out to be anything.
So I'd give it a 6 as well.
I think something that hasn't been touched on yet, and I really like, is the episode's music.
I was just going to say that. So I'm giving it a 6.5, because although I think the script writing, particularly the dialogue, was pretty dire, I really loved the look and the sound of it. I thought it was stunning. I think Mark Snow's really coming into his own by this stage. And, obviously the club scene was decadent and lush, and that's like a quick win for me. But yeah, like the underground tunnels and all of that, the ritual stuff, everything felt very plausible. And they did a lot in terms of visual storytelling, actually, in between the bits with the slightly shoddy dialogue. But yeah, in terms of, I could listen to that, soundtrack over and over. It's beautifully done. So it's that from me as well. Okay.
It wouldn't have made sense to have 2 good character pieces as the last one was, right? What was it, By the Sea?
Yeah, Beyond the
Sea.
Yeah.
Right. And the 2 of those back to back, right? It just seems like a letdown for Scully's.
It's a huge letdown. It's a huge letdown after Beyond the Sea. Yes.
Yeah. The characterization, the dialogue is pretty shoddy. But conceptually it's interesting and it raises important questions. So it's been lovely to have.
But it's worth a watch. I mean, it's not. It's just not the best episode.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you very much to the panelists for joining this discussion today. We hope you, our viewers, have enjoyed it too. Let us know in the comments section what you thought about the episode, and please remember to like and subscribe to the video, and we'll see you next time. The truth is still out there. Bye.